and its operator partner main roads. There was also a note with respect to food security. So there was some suggestions that we strengthen our ties with our neighboring regional districts with respect to creating a more regional plan around food security. There was one inquiry with respect to transit, specifically handy dart access in areas that don't currently have bus service. So we'll be referring that on to our manager of transit to follow up on. And then there was also just a quick inquiry about the status of the East Courtney Fire Hall. So we'll certainly endeavor to refer that over to the city staff to respond to. So as you can tell, in general, not a lot specifically on any of our budgets or our services specifically. So for any of those remaining social media posts that haven't been followed up on, we'll certainly be doing so.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So do you have a motion for receipt for that?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we're on to reports. And we have the interregional transit report. Moved by Grant, seconded by Hillian. Over to staff.
Thank you. And the board at its last meeting asked for us to come forward with respect to this matter, connections between the Comox Valley and Regional District of Nanaimo. And Mike Zabarski is here to provide the report, and outline the recommendation and answer your questions.
Thanks, Russell, through the chair to the committee or the board. So yeah, as Russell mentioned, we did get some requests from the board to investigate this a bit further with BC Transit and Regional District of Nanaimo and to see if we could advance this a little bit sooner. Both are interested. BC Transit is amenable to support the initiative. They had previously suggested maybe a next year thing for them to do the work around a larger interregional service, but they're going to start that work this winter, and with the aim of having something on the 2024 TIPS, which is the Transit Improvement Program, for the board to consider as far as a number of service hours required to implement a larger service interconnection with Nanaimo, and that could be implemented as soon as 2025 potentially. In the meantime, as part of this year's TIPS, so that's going to be this spring, they're going to support a little bit of work to identify the service hours required to connect the existing route number 10, which goes down to Fanny Bay, with RDN's route number 99, which comes up to Deep Bay, 8-kilometer gap. And that would be a fairly small service planning exercise on their part. So they're going to do that work in time for the 2023 TIPS. And then the board can consider whether there's an interest to advance that service connection as soon as 2024. So a smaller service connection potentially in 2024, and then a larger kind of broader inter-regional service opportunity for the 2024 TIPS that could be implemented in 2025. And RDN or their staff at least are interested in it as well. There is a number of references to these pieces of work in their transit plans. So we don't have board commitment from RDN yet, but their staff are suggesting there's probably support there too. So with that, we have a couple of recommendations and just some direction to BC Transit to do that work to support the TIPS processes. Initially with the 2023 TIP, and then also to undertake that larger service investigation starting this winter. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, that sounds hopeful. Thank you. We have Director Cole Hamilton online.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mike. I just simply wanted to say thank you for moving just so quickly. This is just a week ago that this was raised, and I really also appreciate the sort of the two-stage getting something up and going for 2024, and then a more comprehensive plan for 2025. So anyway, looking forward to supporting the recommendation, and thanks for the effort here.
Thank you. Any more questions? Don't see any lights. So we're on receipt, and so go to the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Grieve and Hillian have moved the recommendation that BC Transit be requested to initiate the service investigation in 2023. Any further discussion? Okay, it's both full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We are on to item 2, regional growth strategy bylaw review scope. Moved by Grant, seconded by Grieve. Over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Alana Mullally will come forward, General Manager of Planning and Development, to present the report and the recommendations and answer any of your questions.
Thanks very much, Russell. Through the chair to the directors. So last week's board meeting, you asked us to come back tonight. So last week we presented the posted budget, presented the posted budget for the RGS service, and we highlighted the proposed 2023 work plans, including a potential review of the RGS bylaw in 23. So tonight's report is provided in response to the feedback that you gave us, but it's also provided in respect to a recommendation regarding the 2023-27 financial plan for the service. Our interest really in bringing you this two-prong approach is to ensure that the financial plan going into this period sufficiently provides you with the resources to undertake or to direct staff to undertake the work that you want to see, both in respect to projects and initiatives, as well as the potential for an RGS review. So as I said, there is the second recommendation in this report, and that involves staff coming back to you this spring to further flesh out possible regional growth strategy bylaw amendments or initiation of amendment. And it's at that point, not tonight, but at that point that you'll really want to have a good sense of the scope of the amendment that you would like staff to embark upon. The scope, of course, has implications for use of budget within the service, as well as the availability of staff resources to undertake the work plan that we described in last week's report, which is attached to tonight's staff report as Appendix A. I'll just note that all of the material you received from us last week is in Appendix A to this report. And my colleague Robin Holm is also here to talk about any questions that you might have regarding some of the projects that we spoke to last week. I'm sorry, I neglected to bring the Thanks very much. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the proposed budget that we showed you last week. No change in here from last week. We are proposing to maintain the same level of requisition that you supported in 2021 and in 2022. There are no personnel changes proposed. Right now, we're sitting at a full-time equivalent complement in this service of 3.4, and we do have a senior planner vacancy accounting for that 0.65 of an FTE. You'll see that this budget also includes, there's a zero shown in the 23 prior year surplus. I can talk a little bit more about that later if you wish, but ultimately that surplus is owing to the fact that we had a vacancy, so some of that salary and wages, but also because we weren't necessarily able to undertake all the work that we thought we could because in part of that vacancy. Okay, so these are the projects that we described for you last week, just suggesting to you that within this service, we're contemplating a full work plan, continued work on the RGS hub, implementation of the active transportation network plan in terms of doing a prioritization exercise and then working to secure partnerships and funding. Robin talked to you about our proposed residential emissions reduction action plan. This is an update of some of the work that we've already done around meeting some of our building sector targets for GHG emissions reductions. Robin also talked to you about our work in participating in the Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Regional Peer Network, and then the potential for scoping a climate action strategy. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about how that could be one of the action plans if you go with an RGS review, scope 2 that we talked about last week. We're also continuing our work with the Tamarack Institute and the Community Health Network on collective impact approach to poverty reduction. And then, of course, we've got our wood smoke reduction program within the air quality portfolio, and we owe you a return report on the air quality strategy. We brought that to you in the fall, and you've asked us to come back, so we'll be doing that in the spring. You also, part of the feedback that you gave us last week when we were talking about an RGS review, you asked us to comment on what would be the implications of going with a more comprehensive review. And I would just, say to you that the work that you see here would not be able to be undertaken in this kind of a way. So we would come back to you if you wanted a comprehensive RGS amendment to be undertaken to talk about what we might be able to do within here. But I think just for simplicity's sake, a standard review, a comprehensive review would require the full commitment of our RGS staff. So tonight I've referenced a couple of times option 2. That's the language we were using last week. To speak about the work that culminated from our sessions with the Technical Advisory Committee and Steering Committee over the course of 5 meetings in the fall, where we worked with Alison Habkirk to scope 3 potential options or 3 options for a potential review of the regional growth strategy. So last week, as I say, we pitched this proposal to you, which is option 2. You asked us to flesh out a little bit more some of the details on this option. You asked us to talk a little bit more about community engagement. And you asked us, as I say, to talk about staff resources. So just as a refresher, both text and map amendments generally comprising these elements, staff suggests to you that there's existing policy in the RGS bylaw to support this work and the work on your strategic priorities. And I've included a table in your staff report to refer to those connections to policies. We've also heard from you keen interest to implement the range of studies that we've been undertaking since 2018 within the service. So for example, housing needs, poverty reduction, active transportation, etc. You asked us to speak to the level of community engagement, and last week staff suggested to you that it's staff's experience that generally specific targeted engagement on implementation items, so something that our public can really sink their teeth into and provide meaningful feedback on, is likely to be better received by our public at this point in these tumultuous times. We talked to you a little bit about the availability of staff time, both at the CVRD and with their municipal partners. And the fact that each of the jurisdictions sort of has a full slate of projects and initiatives that we need to respond to. And we're sort of in all hands on deck mode now, which certainly would change depending on your interest in an RGS review. So those are the general text changes we're talking about. And then in respect to mapping changes, these both pertain to map 5, and they really just reflect making the changes to reflect what has already happened lawfully through the annexation of electoral area lands into the municipalities, and then the expiry of the Sage Hills clause that is currently included in the bylaw. Two of the matters that you asked us to address last week were to flesh out a little further detail on the concept of the action plan, as well as how the Technical Advisory Committee and Steering Committees foresee opportunities for both community and industry engagement in an RGS review. So staff suggests to you that the preferred option, number 2, will enable a targeted bylaw amendment that could be considered through a minor amendment process. And in so doing, you could direct the development of action plans, being 5 to 7 year roadmaps to achieve the regional growth strategy goals. Each plan would reference the related RGS objectives and identify mutually reinforcing actions to work closer to those goals. The action plans would be developed in accordance with your strategic priorities, and would support practical application of the RGS and provide you, both yourselves as decision makers, but as well as your staff, with those opportunities to implement the RGS bylaw. The action plan framework staff suggests to you would support the coordination of potentially otherwise isolated or disconnected actions. And inputs, of course, for these action plans would be all of the background studies that we've been overtaking over the last few years or that we have underway. This isn't the best slide, but I think it's a really good slide to tell you, or it's a really good chart to kind of walk you through what the RGS amendment process is. So last week I talked a little bit about the Local Government Act, giving local governments two processes or two ways in which we could make a change to our regional growth strategy. So I've said a couple of times last week, and I said it a couple of times tonight, that staff is of the opinion that the proposed option 2, or pardon me, the preferred option 2, could be considered by you in the context of the minor amendment process, which is on the left of your screen under the orange heading. So a standard amendment essentially is the process by which the Local Government Act says you can adopt a regional growth strategy. So the process on the right under the green is what we went through back in 2009, 2010 to establish the regional growth strategy bylaw that we have today. And a minor amendment is ultimately considered to be anything other than or anything that is not a standard amendment. And our RGS bylaw includes criteria for when a minor amendment process could be considered. In a nutshell, the amendments aren't of regional significance. They don't enable a specific development. And for all other intents and purposes, they don't change the vision or the goals of the regional growth strategy. And so that's why staff has suggested that option 2 lands in our opinion, in this case. A couple of things I really want to highlight for you here. One is that this is your RGS, right? And so you decide by resolution whether you want to initiate an amendment to the RGS. That comes as a board resolution. So it's not a matter of someone being able to make an application to amend the RGS. You might remember we changed that a few years ago. The other thing that's really key in here that responds to one of the bits of feedback that you gave us last week around community consultation, you'll see that in both scenarios, the board, after making a decision to initiate an amendment, then approves a consultation plan. So tonight, this is not your sole kick at the can to determine A, whether you want to do a review, B, what the scope is, C, whether it's minor or standard, and certainly not D, what your consultation is going to be. For the purpose of general guidance, that's why we're providing this chart to you tonight, just to show you, to give you a sense of the process that's involved in amending a bylaw and to give you a sense of where staff's attention would need to be directed. So all really important considerations when you're thinking about scope in the context of setting a financial plan. I think I will leave it there. I know there's a lot of information here and certainly elsewhere in the report, but I suspect that you might have questions. So our recommendation to you tonight, first and foremost, is that you approve the proposed financial plan for the service. And secondarily, that you direct staff to come back to flesh this out a little bit further, the context, the concept of an RGS review. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alana. We do have a question from Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. Can you just refresh my memory on a major amendment? What are the affected governments?
Through Madam Chair to the directors. So the major amendment or the standard amendment, the local government defines affected governments, as Director Grant has noted. And so in our case, the affected governments are defined as the member municipalities, the board, and then the adjacent regional districts. So, Alberni-Clayoquot, Regional District of Nanaimo, and Strathcona Regional District. So the other thing that if you'll just forgive me for using your question, Director Grant, as a segue, thanks. The standard amendment process really speaks to a consensus process, right? This is about obtaining the consensus of all affected governments, local governments, about what you want to amend. And so just that in and of itself, it's a little bit obscured by the Zoom thing, which is okay. But in the bottom part of that right-hand flow chart, you'll see references to approval and then settlement or arbitration. That's all about that consensus basis that's required in order to move forward with the standard amendment. And that's really where the big cost and time effort can kick in.
Thank you. We have a few more questions, starting with Director Grave.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this is being put forward because of the fact that it's expedient and we don't have a lot of money. Because when you look at the minor amendment, you know, compared to the major amendment, and I think Director Kerr brought up the point, where is option 2.5 or whatever, but it's a simple majority of the board. So right away, the electoral area is a total disadvantage. Then proceed to second reading and public hearing if required. Well, there's no consultation in that process. The major may be onerous, but first thing is a consultation plan, then first reading, then a public hearing, then second reading, then refer to local governments. So there's got to be something in between the two where we can actually engage all local governments. I mean, without having to go the whole 9 yards up to the adjoining regional districts and all the rest of it, you know, but the other one just seems to me like a slam dunk. It really doesn't offer any opportunity for public input, let alone the different legislative authorities, the different regional districts, our area planning commissions, the agricultural area planning commissions, the processes we have in the electoral areas. It doesn't go out to Cumberland, doesn't go out to Comox. It's a simple majority of this board, which leaves it wide open for abuse. So I'm not going to support this in this present form. I think we need something that has, because we got to do it right. We've already put it off for 10 years. So, you know, this is just not going to be another rubber stamp. I think we need to come up with something that does involve the communities and has a fulsome discussion around where we're going with this, because it's not, you know, 2009 out there anymore. Thank you.
Through Madam Chair, to the directors, if I might, I just would like to pick up on a couple of Director Graves' comments there. I do want to address that first piece, or is staff putting this forward because it's quick and dirty, quick and cheap, and it might appear that way. But what I really want to say is that that's not the primary reason. The primary reason is because the regional growth strategy is a service and it's a bylaw, right? And so what we've assessed is, what does the bylaw look like? And our suggestion to you that within the bylaw being a 20-year planning horizon, this is not your official community plan with that 5 to 10 year. This was established, set out as a 20-year plan. We are in 2022. So yes, we are at year 23. We're heading into the second decade of the plan, but it is still a robust, resilient plan with life in it. The other reason is that the RDS bylaw is working. And in the staff report, we provide a couple of examples to you as to why the TAC and Steering Committee suggests that the bylaw is working. In respect to the option 2.5, I think, you know, last week we suggested to you that our option 2 sort of, in staff's opinion, and certainly we might be wrong here, we might be missing the mark, but in staff's opinion, that is the 2.5 option. That deals with the things that are outdated in the bylaw. Right. So it's the mapping designation, the Sage Hills reference, the references to Comox Valley Economic Development Society, et cetera. Those are the things that they're outdated. And so that's where we're coming from. The bylaw is working, and we think that the proposed option would give you the ability to engage the community, to direct staff to roll up our sleeves, to work with the stakeholders, development industry on specific thematic issues that matter. So, you know, in our experience, going out to the public to talk generally about high level 20-year policy, you get a mixed bag in response. More commonly, I think in our experience, folks are operating within a more now kind of time frame and engaging on specific thematic matters of their interest, whether it be climate change, housing, food systems, protection of natural areas. Our suggestion to you is that is going to have greater resonance with our public and provide more meaningful input for consultation. It's really important, of course, to think about the level of consultation relative to the scope that you're doing. The option T2 scope, I agree, there's nothing really in there that gives the public the opportunity to engage on. And that's partly because we're suggesting to you that they're within the context of this minor amendment, these minor changes, they don't affect the vision of the RGS. They don't change course. So agreed that is not the pithy material that the public would want to engage on. And it would be disingenuous to suggest that there would be good opportunities for deep consultation when those are the amendments that are being put forward. But the context of an action plan, staff suggest to you that would be altogether different. And then being really long-winded here, I'll wrap it up. But the consultation piece, I do want to say that is yours. You design it. You tell us what's in it. So even if you're pursuing a minor amendment process, although I do think it's really important to consider the kinds of things that you're recommending or looking at changing relative to the substance that someone could actually engage on, you will say to us, staff, we want you to consult with these groups, these organizations, these local governments, presentations to the councils, presentations to the Electoral Area Services Committee. And that's not a question that we're asking you tonight. That's something that we would come back to if and when you choose to initiate an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Warren.
Great, thank you. Well, another question came up as I was listening, but my first question is affected governments. It doesn't include First Nations. I thought that it did, but.
Through Madam Chair to the directors, not as an affected local government, there is provision in the Act for consultation with First Nations. This is again where I would stress this is old legislation. Right? It doesn't reflect where we are and where we need to be. And so within the context of that consultation plan, we would suggest to you in either scenario, minor or standard, we would suggest to you that we develop a specific consultation plan with First Nations.
Right. And so actually much of what you said answered my other question, which was the rationale for doing a standard amendment. And you talked about how it's a 20-year strategy. It's working. I guess I'm wondering also, it seems I've read through the RGS a few times, and there's a lot in the RGS that is still, needs to be implemented or visioned. And I think you're talking about some of that in the action plan. So I guess I'm wondering why we would look at, a standard amendment when there's still so much relevancy to what we have and there's still so much work really to do. And I guess I'm asking if that's a fair assessment.
Through Madam Chair to the directors, yes, Director Morin, and that's where the steering committee and the technical advisory committee landed. There's enough in there to provide that provides a policy basis for the kind of actions that are reflected in your strategic priorities, as well as enough work in there that's contemplated that we haven't yet fully implemented.
Yeah, and in terms of even the mapping and the growth areas and all of that is all still very relevant. The expansion nodes and settlement nodes and all of that. So I guess that's where I'm landing, and it's certainly, the city of Courtenay certainly really align the OCP to the RGS, and I think it's a really good fit. So thanks.
Next, we have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to staff to clarify the consultation plan that you alluded to earlier, because that seems to be the primary area that Director Grieve is finding wanting in this proposal. So I'm just wondering if you could outline that a little further, and whether that is in fact what you would bring back in recommendation 2, which talks about staff coming back, reporting back in the spring, basically fleshing out the scope of this project.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. So I think that the scope and the process together matter. And so what I would suggest to you, we'd be coming back to you within the spring would be a recommendation to initiate. That's that first bullet up at the top whereby the board initiates an amendment. And then we would talk about what are the proposed amendments that we think you should consider. And then you would decide, okay, is this something that we want to undertake either as a minor amendment or a standard amendment? And so spoiler, staff would suggest to you, if it sort of looks like option 2 generally, that we would point you in the direction of the minor amendment, but entirely your choice. And then staff would go away, we'd build a consultation plan based on feedback or multiple consultation plans, and then we'd come back to you. And then by way of another resolution, you would, in either scenario, you would adopt the consultation plan, you would provide notice, the required statutory notice, and then we would kick into high gear.
So what you're proposing would give the directors at the table the opportunity to talk about what sort of consultation they saw as being required, and you would build that into a plan.
Through Madam Chair, that's correct.
Great, thanks for clarifying that.
Next, we have Director Kerr.
Thanks. And just so I'm clear, I'm going to just see what I think I'm hearing, and you just tell me if it's correct. That'd be helpful. So option 2.0 would be really minor wording changes, update the demographic data, that kind of thing. Whereas 2.5 would do that, also allow us to delve into an action plan on some core themes, would provide an opportunity for a flexible community engagement process, how we want to flush that out as a board. And if we did 2.5, it would also allow your RGS team to continue working on your current work plan. It wouldn't divert your time away from the work that you're currently doing as directed by the board. Is that correct?
Through Madam Chair to the director. So I really like the concept of the 2.0 and the 2.5. We weren't on that page when we brought forward this recommendation. So I would suggest to you that the option 2 is that it's the minor text and map plus the action plans. And I would suggest that the action plans that there really isn't probably meaningful stuff in the proposed text and map amendments to go out to the public on in a really considered way. But if you wanted staff to do the action plans, that's where we could come back to with a consultation plan. You could adopt, you could give us your feedback on with whom and how you would like us to consult.
Next, we have Director Hardy.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if there's an appetite of having a third party come in and do a review of the RGS that could then turn around and recommend to the board whether we should go the option of just keeping it a minor amendment, or if we go with the standard amendment. Again, it's just having a third set of eyes is nothing against our staff. Our staff is suggesting that we go this route of maybe just going with the second. But again, if there was a means of having a third party come in, have a look at the RGS and say, based upon what I've looked at, you may want to consider doing a standard amendment, or we agree with staff and their comments to the board with regards to it may be better just to go through to the second or minor. Sorry. Thanks.
I think it wasn't just regional district staff, but through the advisory, it was all the CAOs that had landed on that option.
Through Madam Chair, right. So it was the technical advisory committee comprising planning and engineering staff, and then your steering committee are your 4 CAOs, but certainly no public consultation on scope of an amendment or process, and no advice was sought from a consultant.
And Madam Chair, given the process involves you developing your consultation plan and then us going out and implementing that, that will be the third party. That will be the opportunity for the community to say, you haven't got this right. You should be considering a standard amendment if it's wrong or otherwise. And you, as Alana said previously, I think at the last meeting, you can start a minor, and if you so choose or see that the playing field has changed, you can refer to a standard amendment. So I think that process of consultation that you will develop in the spring with us and going out to the public will be that third party. It will be the public speaking to you to say whether we've got it right or not.
Did you want to follow up, Director Hardy?
So again, I think it would be a good idea to have a third party come in and do a quick evaluation of where we are. If I'm understanding correctly from the CEO, that there is a process of a third party review, but that takes place after we've already decided whether we're going to go with a minor or a standard process. So I just throw it out there.
Thank you. So it's after a first reading. So we could always change from a minor process to standard after first reading.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. So, as Russell's indicated, your third party, if you wanted to think about them broadly, could be your public, right? Those folks that you want to hear from on whether or not we got it right. If you opted, you initiate an amendment, you say, this is the general scope of the amendments that we think can be taken. You say, we're going to do this as a minor amendment process. So we're at 4 decision points at this point, right? You've then told staff consultation. This is the consultation plan. We go out and we do consultation. And maybe the feedback we get is, whoa, we think that there are some significant challenges with this bylaw, that preclude this and this and this from happening, or that we're not getting it right in respect to such and such and such. We bring that feedback back to you. And then so within the context of this, if you're on the minor amendment track, you wouldn't grant probably first reading to a bylaw where if you're getting public feedback saying you're not going far enough. And I think it would be at that point, as Russell has said, and Chair, that you could then say, we really want staff to revisit this. We want to broaden the scope of the amendment. And this is, I guess, where the critical decision piece comes tonight, is that we've given you some suggested budget around doing sort of an either or scenario. Either you go focused, targeted on the RGS review with the action plans, and we can do it within the proposed budget and undertake the initiatives that are identified on that 2023 slide. Or you say, nope, staff, we want you focused on looking at policy language, consulting on policy language in the public. And that's when we would say, okay, we'll use the budget that we're recommending to you and devote that to just the review of the bylaw. So that's the decision point tonight. So in neither scenario do we propose that an increase in requisition needs to happen, but just it would be a shift in priority, a shift in work plan.
Could there also be a budget amendment later in the year?
Through Madam Chair, if you have us go down this standard amendment, we can't do that in a year. Last week, we talked to you about, likely if all is going well to get through the statutory amendment process on the minor amendment side, that would take us about a year, say 12 to 14 months is what we'd anticipate. If we are in the standard amendment, even if things are going really well, we would suggest you, based on the experience here previously and based on the experience of our colleagues around the province, this is a 2 to 3 year process, a standard amendment. So we would definitely come back to you in 2024. I don't think you'd need to do a budget amendment, but in 2024, we would have a recommendation about allocation of resources.
Okay, thank you. Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And with the greatest respect, once again, this is the second go around. We, as electoral areas, we share our staff with municipalities. So we don't have a designated person in our corner. We saw that the first time when we did this, because at the time, the CEO of Courtney was very strong and very vocal. And a lot of the policies that came out of this was as a result. Luckily, they had a pretty strong mayor in Comox too, who kind of countered it. But for the technical advisory, I mean, I guess that's no getting around that. But so we've got no reach out to First Nations, no reach out to councils. My question is, we heard whether this was just a letting the cat out of the bag thing, but we did hear from Comox that Comox is eyeing an expansion because they're hemmed in by their boundaries. So if they were going to expand into the settlement expansion areas, which would be mostly area B, sorry, Richard, then would that constitute a standard amendment at that point? Or would it be something that the provincial government could do with order and council?
Through Madam Chair to the Director. So a couple questions there. One being the provincial process around incorporating electoral area lands into the municipality provincial process. And then the second piece would be how our regional growth strategy looks at those lands. So in option 2, we talked to you about making that alignment between lands that have been annexed into municipalities since the RGS was adopted and redrawing the municipal boundary. So that's something that can be done using a minor amendment. If a municipality wants to incorporate lands, rural lands that are in the existing settlement expansion area, the bylaw provides for that. The bylaw says that you can do that. And then the planning framework or scheme, provided that it's consistent with what's in the RGS, that can occur. You don't need a standard amendment. So it really just depends what the municipality, if the province approves an incorporation, and then what the municipality is proposing to do with the lands, whether or not an RGS amendment would be triggered.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to pick up on Director Hardy's suggestion of a third-party review of some sort. Director Hardy's brought the idea forward, and it's clear that it's not part of the staff plan. And I don't see it as being something that would be particularly helpful. I mean, it's not on the floor as a resolution, so we have no idea whether who that might be and what the criteria would be for by which a third party would make some sort of a review. So I see this as essentially a political decision that's made at the board. And my concern is finding a way that reconciles the interests of the municipalities in the areas. And what I hear from Director Grieve in particular is a concern about lack of consultation, of asking people, particularly in the regional areas, what they think of the existing RGS. And I hear staff responding that what's being proposed provides a means to do that. And so on that basis, I'm prepared to support the proposal that staff brings forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Morin's next.
Yeah, thank you. I think what staff has outlined makes sense because it does basically give the ability to exercise any of the options that have been discussed. I know, you know, there was a kind of a joke made about or a comment made about is this the fastest, cheapest way? Well, I think we do need to consider that, as far as I'm aware, the other municipalities are both embarking on OCP journeys. And also the rural areas, I believe, as well are entertaining that. So those processes in themselves, I think, shouldn't be ignored. You know, we did ours during COVID. It took longer than we anticipated. And we've just begun the work, really, getting it printed and all that consultation was huge, and now there's a bunch more work to do. So I don't think we should underestimate you know, the work that a standard amendment would take and the stress that it would have on not just the municipalities but the electoral areas as well. And sure, we could throw all kinds of money at it to hire all kinds of staff and to take on all this extra work, but I have not heard one compelling reason why we need to look at a standard amendment, and the options that are outlined have actually allow for the ability to look at that through this process. So for that reason, I'm supporting the recommendation. Thanks.
Okay, Director Grant, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't see any further lights. We're on receipt. It's above the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And there's recommendation. Moved by Grant. Seconded by Hillian. And that's that the proposed financial plan for the Regional Growth Strategy Service be approved. Any further discussion on that? It's above the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Grieve? And that's carried. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Grant. Recommendation 2 is that staff report back in spring of 2023 regarding the initiation of amendment to the regional growth strategy that generally reflects the contents of the RGS strategy review scope option 2. Any further discussion? Alternate Director Monroe.
Is there a point or a place in this recommendation that it could be amended to say, including any appropriate consultation? Is that helpful to bring forward Director Greaves' concerns about focusing on the consultation in the areas?
Madam Chair, I would respond with the staff report and presentation provided by Alana outlined the procedure whereby staff will be bringing back for the consideration of the board options for the engagement, and the board will adopt that engagement plan in the spring. That's part and parcel of this.
So yet to be decided on the engagement plan.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, it's almost that two-step dance, right? You decide that you want to initiate, and then separate decision point, you decide what kind of amendment process you want to do. And then step 3, did I say step 2? Two-step dance. Step 3, then staff has to build a consultation plan relative to what you've told us the scope and the type of amendment is. So I don't think we'd be able to bring the two together. Certainly on the heels of, we would be working to that. So it's a continual discussion. But
Okay, thank you. Director Kerr.
Yeah, and I just want to, speak to Director Greaves' comments as well. I mean, I'm a huge fan of robust community engagement. So I will be looking forward to seeing that as part of the plan when it comes to us. And I hope, Director Greaves, at that point, we can incorporate something that will satisfy your concerns and my concerns as well of involving the public as much as possible, even with a option 2.5.
Yeah, so just from my own understanding, the community engagement under option 2 would be around the plans, the individual plans. So housing, ecosystems, natural areas and parks, local economic development, transportation, infrastructure, food systems, public health and safety, and climate change.
through Madam Chair, the focus of the engagement would be on the action plans. And in the report, we talk about one for each of the 8 goals, which you've just listed. We talk about that with you, what that looks like. It would not be consultation on the actual bylaw amendment, which is where we're suggesting maybe not so meaningful for much of our public versus the action plans.
Thank you. Director Grant.
Yeah, I think if I'm listening to Director Greaves carefully enough here, I think he's talking about representation and making sure that the areas don't get railroaded by the municipalities. And I think that's really what he's more worried about, which, may or may not be legit, but is there something that we could do within this plan to help with that piece?
Through Madam Chair to the directors, we can certainly think about that, but I guess 2 things I would flag: the comment that there's nobody in the electoral areas corner. The technical advisory committee includes the planning managers of each of the 4 jurisdictions. And so our electoral area planning function was wholly represented in the technical advisory committee discussion. So I appreciate what you're saying around the governance structure of the committee versus the councils, but certainly from a staff level, there is someone in the electoral area corners. There's a few of us for sure. The second part, could something be dealt with? Perhaps it's through the strategic planning sessions that we can really flesh out the critical issues that the electoral area directors are wanting to see in the regional growth strategy, and then for that matter, in the official community plan and in the zoning bylaw. We are committed to that work. And when we presented the rural planning budget to the directors, we made provisions for those things to happen.
Yeah, because when we're talking about third party and then sort of finding that balance between rural and municipal interests, I think that is more of a strategic planning exercise. So we will be having those sessions in June. So how does then that fit into this plan that we're choosing today, option 2.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. So we'll go first before the full board session. We're going to the electoral area directors in April 3rd, I believe, James. And so we could start to have that conversation fleshing out to understand, you know,
Okay.
what do the electoral area directors want to see in the regional growth strategy? Because frankly, and this is referenced in the report, but if the directors don't agree that those 8 goals are relevant, then option 2 doesn't fly, right? This option really depends on all of the members affirming that those 8 goals remain relevant. And so that would, I think, April 3rd, we could certainly have initiate that conversation with our rural directors.
That's good. So that's coming up quite quickly then. All right, I don't see any further lights, and we were on recommendation 2, and that is giving the staff the direction on the scope option 2. And this is a vote of full board. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Grieve? And that's carried. Okay, so we're moving on to item 3, social planner options. Moved by Grant, seconded by McCollum, and over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and Directors, and Alana Mullally will present this report and the recommendations and respond to your questions.
Thank you very much, Russell. Through Madam Chair to the directors. So this report is provided to you tonight primarily in response to a board resolution that you made on January 31st. Excuse me, wherein you asked us to come back and talk about how, within the context of this financial planning process, you could essentially set up a placeholder for a social planner role. So to date, you've received staff reports on the current community partnerships framework board policy that we have, as well as a report from a third party regarding social developments in local government. And with receipt of both of those reports last fall, you identified, or suggested that both could be further fleshed out in your upcoming strategic planning sessions. So we're offering this report tonight to you as a very first step in considering creating a social planner position. And I do want to flag on the topic of consultation, staff have not undertaken any community or key party consultation in putting together this report. Rather, we are making a recommendation regarding the provision of placeholder funding because of the timing around your consideration of the financial plan. There is a recommendation, or pardon me, part of the recommendation that speaks to or commits to undertaking consultation with both municipal staff, as well as the leadership teams of the Community Health Network, the Social Planning Society, and the Coalition to End Homelessness, and certainly the Comox First Nation, if there is interest. But as I say, we didn't flesh anything out, so in advance of putting this report together. This report suggests that within the context of the existing CBRD services and or existing community partnerships, a social planner could be used to do the 4 things that the consultants report flagged for us in the fall, being building buy-in, convening and coordinating, collecting data, recommending policy for poverty reduction work, and serving as a resource or liaison between the CBRD and nonprofit organizations. I would also suggest to you that a social planner could help build capacity within the CBRD to be an effective partner and contributor in addressing the poverty reduction strategies game changers. The staff report talks about how a first key step would be to understand how the CBRD could support existing work that's already underway in the community to reduce poverty. And so we know from discussions around that table that you're all well aware of both the work and jurisdiction of the province and of the federal government, and then certainly the work that is being undertaken by a number of our local nonprofit organizations. So a social planner, we envision, would, in these early days, if you opt to go this route, would work on building those relationships with the nonprofit organizations and with local, provincial, and senior government ministries and agencies. As a convener or coordinator, again, the social planner would need to work to identify partners, to flesh out what is the best role for the CBRD, and then essentially to identify partners who share a common agenda with the board, what it is that you are looking to accomplish. The report talks about working with those 3 key organizations, And so that's, those are the initial starting points that staff suggest to you. In respect to data collection and policy, we would suggest that a social planner in the early days could monitor indicators of poverty using existing local data, but also using existing provincial data. And they could look at recommending policy changes across the CVRD that would bring that social equity lens to our local government services and programs. As a liaison, I think this is the key piece. We really could use this person to work with those provincial agencies to understand what is the appropriate role for the CVRD. Where can you have the most impact within the limits of our jurisdiction and resources? And then on the last piece, I think the social planner in the early days would work really closely with staff in the member municipalities to ensure that the actions across the community are mutually reinforcing, and that we're not stepping out into an area where another local government might be better poised to act, for example. So in undertaking this kind of work, the social planner, together with CVRD staff, could assist the board in understanding the need for and the potential scope of a social planning service and or the ability to prepare a social planning framework as a regional growth strategy action plan. Can't help myself. So our recommendation to you tonight is just to consider including funding in both the regional growth strategy, financial plan, and the homelessness support service budget for a full-time equivalent. This is a new staff position in order to undertake this work in response to that direction that you gave us back in January. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions starting with Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the reports. So I need some help to understand the timing here, because you talk about creating a placeholder, but you also talk about hiring somebody to kind of help develop a framework. So is the plan actually to hire somebody this spring and get them working?
Yeah, through Madam Chair to the directors. That's right. So I guess my reference to the placeholder was more just to say, if you want something to happen in 2023 for a resource to be devoted to these efforts, then we would suggest to you consider that within the context of this budget. We don't have the staff resources. I think we've talked to you about, I'm sorry to say this, but we don't have the staff resources at this point to undertake the kind of detailed work that is talked about here. So if you'd like to see that happening in 23, our suggestion to you is to consider that in the context of the financial plan and put some dollars in, and then have that person in place. If we were lucky, it would be in the spring to start working on these pieces and further fleshing out with you what your interests around a potential service would be.
And would the intent be that this is a permanent position, or is it a short-term hire until that further strategic planning and development work takes place?
Through Madam Chair to the directors, that's certainly something that we would, we'd work with Russell on around the operational piece. Is it a term? Is it a full-time equivalent? This, in order to give you some sort of maximum flexibility at this stage without knowing necessarily what you're looking for, contemplates provision for a full-time position. Could be term, could be a permanent employee.
Final question for now. With 0.25 of the FTE coming from the homelessness support service, that's essentially taking money away from what could be providing additional housing through that function. And there's something about that doesn't really sit well.
Through Madam Chair to the directors, this is a tough one, and we've suggested to you through the service review that was undertaken that this service really has evolved since it was established, and no personnel are assigned to that service, and it does use a considerable amount of staff time. So I think this would be an accurate reflection of what kind of personnel would be reasonable. I would also note that you did increase the maximum requisition in that service, and you have not yet allocated all of the dollars there. So the report talks a little bit about how you wouldn't necessarily need to change the requisition in 2023 to make this scenario happen.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we have Director Kerr.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the report. And I'm very much in favor of supporting this in general, and having a social planner available and to support the programming in the community. I think all of us around the table, I haven't looked at the complete email list, but we received a letter after 2 o'clock today from the Comox Valley Community Health Network and the Comox Valley Social Planning Society jointly. And also I've received an email today from the Coalition to End Homelessness leadership team. And there's just general surprise, overall support for this position, but surprise that they haven't been consulted to this stage yet over where the funding is going to be coming from. Again, Director Hillian's concern or a question about the HSS funding going towards this. I understand the rationale, but they don't. So I'm just wondering at what point will that engagement happen with them, and perhaps we need to engage with them and talk about this plan before we approve it, and especially the funding.
Madam Chair, I can respond to that. Typically, our positions that we create within the regional district respond to the priorities of the regional board, and they're developed over a series of months with business plans or otherwise. And we bring those forward through the budget process beginning in the fall. This particular position was not part of that process, in which we undertake a dialogue with our partners and collaboration with nonprofits and those that we serve. We didn't have the benefit in this case. This was an initiative that you, the board, asked us to investigate, and we're just bringing back to you the preliminary investigation on it to see whether you are committed to this, knowing what the implications are. So I apologize to those organizations that we haven't had the capacity to do that, but we are doing this a little bit off the side of our desk in a way that isn't normally routine for us. I think it's with your commitment to do this and the adoption of the recommendations that are provided here that then enables us to go out and talk to those organizations, knowing that this is something that we will implement. Unfortunately, again, due to the time frame, we don't have time to say where the monies are coming from or otherwise. We have to put something in order. But certainly, if we've missed the mark here, if there's other resources that can be applied or a different way of doing that, the allocation of this position, if it is created, could be amended in a subsequent budget for the next year.
Can I just clarify, Alana, the 0.25 that would be coming out of the homelessness support service? Would you say that that is an accurate representation of the time allotted to date? And even if we didn't move forward with the position of a social planner, that is more accurately representing the administration of that function?
Through Madam Chair, to the directors, no, I would suggest that 0.25 is a gross underestimate of the resources that are actually being devoted to that service.
Is an underestimate,
yes,
of the current.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, thanks to staff for getting this report on our agenda. It's been a pretty quick turnaround from this item being flagged at our kind of initial strategic planning session. And I can appreciate that trying to meet that expectation creates other complications. But I think it's well supported and it makes sense. It's something that we've talked about previously, and it addresses a known gap in some of the initiatives that we would like to undertake versus what our capacity is as an organization. So I'm quite happy to see it here. I also share some concern over allocating it in this initial budget to the homelessness support service, just because it kind of predetermines how that position responds to or how that resource is allocated before we've really gone out to our partners and considered exactly what that position what need it's going to be serving in our community. So I would prefer that it sits within the regional growth strategy in the budget, and maybe there could be a resource allocation subsequent to getting the position, describe, or like there's got to be a job description, and these things need to be hashed out, and then maybe it could be revisited. Maybe it's a halftime position in the homelessness support service. And yeah, so that's kind of my general comment on that split for the time being. And then the other question I had is just that we don't really have a sense of what the financial impact is. We're just looking at an FTE, but we don't really know what kind of cost impact we're talking about, because that may help answer the concerns about the 0.25 FTE. And then my additional comment to that is, would this not be a 0.5 FTE, given that by the time this person is up and running, it will probably be halfway through 2023, or am I misunderstanding that?
Through Madam Chair to the director, so a couple pieces there. I'll try the last one. I'm certainly not versed in HR. James, you might need to take this over for me, but I think the reference here was just that it's a full resource that we're talking about. So it certainly could be a half-time resource, and we would still recommend this same division of, a 3/4, 1/4 split of that half time. But, you're right. We haven't fully fleshed this out. This was just an effort to respond to the interest. And thank you for acknowledging that we heard where there might be interest in doing something in 23. The option, and an alternative option that's in this staff report is to not make any financial commitments right now. Wait until we get into the 24 plan and then do it then. And then, for example, you could use your strategic planning session this year, perhaps, to devote some time to further fleshing this out. When you receive those reports from us back in the fall, that's sort of on the path that you were on. And then, I appreciate that things change. So you could certainly do that as an alternative. Consider those reports in your June strategic session, and then, direct staff, whether it's to come back with some further work or just to come back in the 24 financial plan with a more robust, better understood role for that position. This is simply to give you some breathing room should you wish in 2023.
Yeah, so just to clarify, when I say 0.5 FTE, I mean like 0.5, given that it's 6 months out of 12, but it would be a full-time position. And if it were funded like that in the budget, could that not just reside on the regional growth strategy until the following budget, when we have a better understanding of, I don't know if that was clear because I rambled a little bit.
Through Madam Chair, I probably didn't answer it properly. So the reference to the full-time is that it is a full-time position. So we'd be looking for having to have someone on this 5 days. You're right. Perhaps they start in October. And so then the actual dollars that would be allocated, there could be some carry forward. We'd have a surplus that would then go back into a full 12-month use of this role. But the way that we do it, James, help me out here, is that the allocation is for a full-time resource, even if the monies aren't fully expended in salaries and wages in that budget year.
Okay, thanks.
And Madam Chair, I just asked James if he might also comment on the cost as well.
Sure. So I think, yeah, Lana, you've answered it well. The concept and the recommendation is that it would be 3/4, 75% funded from the RGS service and 25% funded from the homelessness support service. Whether we can fill it and it's filled for 6 months or 3 months or a full 12 months, that's the budget component of it. And with respect to a position of this nature, we have to consider the salary as well as the benefits. And so I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me. I'm not sure that we've actually fleshed that out entirely, whether this would be a junior, a middle level, a senior position. That's partly in the definition of the role, which I think is what is intended to be explored over the coming months as we lead into June and then getting direction from the board. So yeah, I don't have an exact dollar figure, but it would certainly have to consider that level of seniority and the amount of accountability and responsibility that's going to be attracted to that kind of a position. But you're absolutely right. If this position's hired over only 6 months of the year, we're fortunate enough to look at July, let's say, then the funding requirement would only be for 0.5 for 2023, anticipating that we would be going forward with a full-time equivalent for future years.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
yeah, and in the recommendation, it's that 75% funding coming out of the RGS and 25% coming out of the homelessness.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason why I'm zeroing in on that is because the concern around a 0.25 to the homelessness support service and then half of that on the full year, it's less of an impact to that service if we're lacking that consultation piece, but having an understanding of what kind of dollar figure we're talking about assigning to the service might be helpful. So Thanks.
I'd just say to that point, if I might, Madam Chair, through the act of, in the proposed budget stage, increasing the maximum requisition to 451, those really rough, broad numbers that we did crunch and pulling this together suggest to you that you would not need to take away from the projects that were spoken to you about in 451 for allocation, but there would be an impact on the requisition for 512 RGS, but not on the homelessness and support service.
Thank you. Director Grieve, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this has been 14 years in the making. We can argue over little bits and pieces of where the budget comes from, but we have never seen more need than we do right now. I would think by procrastinating on this issue that, you know, we might end up with missing a very valuable opportunity to actually have action right now. So my question, though, through the staff is, should we decide to make this a permanent position, then, and that would take the pressure off the other services like RGS and homeless. So will we have to go then to a public assent on this position? Or is it something we could do internally?
Through Madam Chair to the director. So the recommendation here is that within the context of the purpose of the Regional Growth Strategy Service and the Homelessness and Support Service, we feel that there is the enabling authority for you to assign personnel to these kinds of tasks. So we're not talking about service establishment at this point, just the recruitment of an individual to focus on tasks that look generally like this, but more importantly, to work with you to flesh out and staff to flesh out what does the role look like, and then perhaps come back to you with a recommendation around service establishment in future.
So we get the boots on the ground first, and then we see how it forms. And then later, at a later date, we can decide whether or not we can put it in its own little compartment, its own little silo. So yeah, I think I encourage the board to support this because we are in dire need right now.
Next, we have Dr. Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. So I am curious in regards to last week's budget announcement, or was it the previous week that province had a budget announcement?
Last week.
And there was a commitment by the provincial government in regards to significant dollars being directed towards a number of these tasks or activities that we're talking about right now. So is there a means of us being able to, with regards to this particular position, is there a means of us going and through advocacy work, trying to get this position, maybe financed by the provincial government based upon their announcements last week or the week before?
You could try. I haven't seen the province fund any of our positions yet, but it's definitely worth a try. And I think that, if you as the board want to take initiative on something that's within your realm of possibility, and this is within your realm because it fits within some of the services that you have, you have the authority and ability to do that. Certainly, Ilana has referenced that this position in itself is about dialogue and is working with provincial ministries as well as nonprofits to make sure that the actions and initiatives that are a priority to you are coordinated and delivered together.
And more likely we would get funding for programs rather than the position itself.
Yes, typically the province awards funding to a study, to infrastructure, or to programs that have a very short term or otherwise, as opposed to long term commitments of staffing. And typically reports or studies that they fund, we are required to consult that work out as opposed to claim the costs or expenses of doing it ourselves.
Thanks. Dr. Kerr, go ahead.
Thank you. And again, this is another question in the not if, but how category. If we were to change the budget allocation to 1 FTE in the regional growth strategy and 0 for the HSS for this year, how would that affect our budgetary process this year? Would that be a significant issue, or would that be something supported by staff if the board decided to do that tonight?
Given that the hiring will happen later in the year, not at the beginning, that's something that we could live with. And if that's something that you would propose, then we could assess the how the one FTE is spread across the other services, if at all, in the subsequent year.
Okay, any further questions? Director Hillian? No, somebody put it first. Director Morin, go ahead.
Unfortunately, I've had a variety of issues today, including technological, and I did not receive any of those emails that have been referenced, and I would really appreciate a little bit of a synopsis, because we did receive the one email with concerns about funding coming out of the coalition. I'm a rep on the social planning for Courtney, and I'm fully supportive of this, but I guess I'm sort of singing Director Greaves' tune in terms of the consultation piece. So I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of this, but I would really like to hear information from some of the partners sooner in the process. And would it be okay to share just a synopsis of some of that feedback?
And Madam Chair, just to clarify, staff don't have copies or have not received it to our knowledge. And so if we had received anything from the public, we would have brought that to your attention or put it on the agenda.
And through Madam Chair, that, you know, just the tight timeline, I reached out to those 3 groups. I contact folks within each of those groups on Friday by email. And in that email, I committed to following up, depending on the discussion tonight, at the earliest convenient time possible. And I got one response with the responder saying that she would work with me to set up that meeting as soon as possible.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, as I say, I'm not opposed to going forward, but I'm just thinking there might be, in terms of what this looks like, I think we need more information on what it looks like going forward. So anyway, I'll let someone else go ahead.
I think the main concern would be the funds coming from out of the homelessness support service. So if we were to remove that, we would probably alleviate the concern coming from the nonprofits. And I think they probably also don't want us to stall too much on the decision, considering the need. Dr. Hillian?
Thanks, Chair. I started working in human services in Courtney in 1979. And in the mid to late 80s, it became apparent that there was a need for coordination and better planning of services. Coincidentally, that was happening in other areas as well. It was happening in economic development. It was happening in environmental issues. And it coincided with a desire on the part of people to be more engaged in developing and planning the services and the programs that were involved in their lives. We formed a social planning society, and it's been going for all those years. Director Grieve has been soldiering away there for a long time. He's a dedicated supporter of the process, and he knows better than most how very little gets accomplished when you don't actually have the staff resources to augment the goodwill and the wisdom of people in the community who are prepared to come out and put their shoulder to the wheel. So this plan is not perfect. It raises questions about how it will function and what it will actually do, how it might engage with the plan that Courtney has to assess what the role of the municipality is in a social framework. But it represents a huge move forward in terms of devoting staff resources to support the huge issues in the community that this board and this staff has been dealing with over the last number of years without the adequate resources to manage. And I strongly encourage us to move forward with this, although there's part of me that would consider bouncing it over for another year. It's one of those things that if we don't do it now, it might not happen. And I think that we've seen what happens when we don't have the staff resources to fully engage with our community agencies in the complex issues that we've been asked by the province to take on, whether that be childcare, homelessness, housing, whatever, poverty reduction. We see on our streets every day how much worse these challenges are becoming and how they're beyond the scope of local government and local people to adequately deal with. Having a professional at the table to assist with this work is just another resource that will help us to engage with our community. And I think that the suggestion that's been made that we fund this out of the regional growth strategy for the first year and take it out of the homelessness support services at 25%. I think that addresses any concerns that the local agencies may have. Those local agencies will be jumping for joy if they in fact hear that we have gone ahead with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have alternate Director Monroe.
A quick question. Thanks, Madam Chair, but based on the comments of Directors Morin and Hillian, are there resources in the municipalities that are focused on social planning? And if so, is there an opportunity for synergies here?
Through Madam Chair to the directors, that is a really key piece of what we need to flesh out in the early days. So that would be a task with this person in place, not necessarily just the resources that might be available within the municipalities, but where can we coordinate our efforts to have the greatest impact? And so, as Russell said, it might be that there's a different financial arrangement at some point, but for this year, I think the first steps would be to Director Hillian's point around the work that Courtney is going to be doing, sort of looking at that social developments landscape, where can we work together to have maximum impact? And then come back to you in future with budget recommendations accordingly.
And if I may, that I think what I'm really getting at there too is that one cook in the kitchen kind of approach to this, that it would be brought to as a regional service as opposed to individual services offered out of the municipalities, and how would we go about consolidating those resources?
Through Madam Chair to the director. So maybe to that point, Director, alternate Director Monroe, the example in the report is around Cathet and their the Cathet Regional District working with the Tla'amin Nation and the City of Powell River. And so they have developed a shared resource and they've worked out, a budget sharing scenario. So that is something that could come back to you, once we figure out what is the work that you envision for this social planner, and then consulting with the member municipalities and the electoral area directors, because there's rural work to be done too, very likely, that could populate the work plan of this role.
Thank you. I see Director Cole Hamilton has his hand online.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to propose an amendment. I think it would make more sense for it to be funded for this initially through the regional growth strategy until we get a clear sense of what the scope of it, what the work will be. And I think it perhaps also because it's the RGS is a service that obviously all members of this board contribute to. So I'd be willing to propose an amendment that it be 1.0 full-time equivalent from the regional growth strategy, and then delete the line referring to 0.25 from the homeless support service.
Okay, we are on receipt, so if you just hold that thought.
Sorry, little girl, I'll hold that. Thanks.
Yeah, hold that thought and stay on the line there. We'll receive. So the full board, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Director Hamilton.
Okay, thanks. So I would just propose an amendment that it be 1.0 from the full-time equivalent from the RGS, and then delete the line with 0.25 FTE from the homeless support service.
Is there a second? Okay, Director Morin, and so we're speaking to the amendment now, Director Kirk.
Great, Director Cole Hamilton, you beat me to it. I'm going to get you back for that one. So I support this. I would also like to propose. Can I propose an amendment at this point?
Yeah, I was
To add
actually
somewhere.
incorrect because it wasn't an amendment. That was just.
That was
on
the,
floor.
yeah, that was it. Okay, so I'd like to propose an amendment just to add, after it says Comox Valley Community Health Network, that we include Comox Valley Social Planning Society and the Coalition to End Homelessness. Those are the three, I think, key organizations among others that should be involved, but those three would encompass most of the groups that are involved under their umbrellas that we would want to be addressing.
So is there any that would consider that not a friendly amendment? Okay, so it's a friendly amendment.
Yeah, Comox Valley Social Planning Society and the Coalition to End Homelessness. Sorry, the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness.
Okay. Yeah, I think just adding those groups as a friendly amendment, so we don't need to vote on it as a full amendment. Speaking to the resolution, Director Hardy.
Just asking, do we need to include WHA Friendship Center in that as well, or is it good with just the groups that we've identified? They're part of the coalition?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion? It is a vote of full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Alana.
Thank you very much.
That takes us to, item 4, Electoral Area Service Committee. And there's just a recommendation there for the Community Works Funds. Can I get a motion for receipt, Director Grave?
Yeah. Second.
And Director Grant, thank you. Yeah, so some of the things being funded are Seal Bay Park, $100,000 in 2023 and $70,000 in 2025. The Lazo Greenway, $350,000, Dyke Road Park, $230,000, Barber Road Greenway, $30,000, and One Spot Trail and Spike Road property, $155,000. Any further discussion? Director Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I think I heard alternate director Monroe ask where Dyke Road Park is, and there may be many in the community that don't, but I believe there was a staff report that made reference to the area along Dyke Road, also known as Comox Road, and some development that is going on there. And I'm just wondering if staff can fill us in on that at all.
Doug, could you come forward and describe the location of the Dyke Road Park, please?
Oh, was that you? Sorry.
So yes, through the chair, Dyke Road Park is just along Comox Road, along the estuary there. Many of you will be familiar with Couscous Sum as you're traveling towards Comox and the Comox First Nation. It's that park with the lookout that overlooks Couscous Sum and out to the glacier. There's been activity there over the years as from Rotary, who also sponsor that lookout. So it's that small parcel along the road in that area.
So it's actually where the viewing platform is. And can you briefly describe, please, the work that this money will do on that park, please?
Well, long term, there's a couple of projects underway in that park. Some of it's looking at other grant opportunities in partnership with Alana's group to look at green shoring. Some of it's working with the KFN Guardians as well, working to promote that green shore type approach and potentially replacing the lookout as you described it to a different kind of structure as there is some concerns with the substructure around emergency management height and other things, as well as some improvements to parking. So there's a number of plans in place, and this is just securing the community works funds to help assist with those plans as we move forward.
Thanks very much. It's a wonderful spot to stop and take in the incredible beauty of the community that we live in, and I really appreciate that we're investing in this. Thanks.
Thank you. So we are on recommendation 1. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 5 is the sewage commission recommendation moved by Greaves, seconded by Moran. And it's that staff be authorized to enter into the necessary contracts of purchase and sale required to proceed with the land exchange for deposition for the Comox Valley Sewerage Service surplus property, Beach Street. Any further discussion? Director Grant, go ahead.
I think this might have come up at a previous meeting and that I wasn't at, so I'm not exactly really clear on what this is about. But are these like for like value wise? Because they're completely different properties. And the reason I'm asking is I know a guy's been harping about buying the Beach Street property since the day we bought it. And now we're going a different direction. I know he's going to ask me. So I don't know enough about it to know if what we're doing here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The two properties have been subject to consideration by the Sewage Commission, and it is an exchange so that we can conduct works on the property that we'll be gaining access to. The Beach Street property is redundant to the Sewage Commission, no longer required for any works or otherwise. Assessments were made of the two properties, appraisals provided to ensure that value was being provided to both parties and it was equivalent in the exchange. And so, yeah, I can say that background information has been done and justified and shared with the Sewage Commission.
Okay, and it is a way to vote with Courtney and Comox. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Move recommends.
So we're on to the Comox Valley Recreation Commission minutes from February 21st, moved by Greaves, seconded by Grant. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. We're on to parcel tax roll review panel from February 22nd. Moved by Grant, seconded by Greaves. Vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to item 8. The electoral area minutes from February 27th. And it's moved by Greaves, seconded by Grant. And it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. There's a recommendation. Moved by Moran, seconded by Grant, and that's that a contribution of $17,691 in Denman and Hornby Island CWF towards the covered shelter project and fund the balance of $40,000 by way of tax requisition. Any further discussion? It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Recommendation 2. Moved by Grant. Has it been seconded? Seconded by Hillian, and over to Director Green.
Yeah, I think we have a little point of order, I think, but I'm thinking the Comox Valley Local Service Function 305 does include Area A.
Sorry, going back to the sewage commission.
Mark or Kevin, are you able to confirm? Kevin?
Recommendation 2, because it's talking about the LSA 305, 306, 309, 314, and it's only giving B and C weighted votes when the Comox Valley Local Water Service Area also includes Area A, or they would not sit at the committee.
Thanks, Kevin.
Through the chair to the director. So currently, according to my records, it's a defined portion of B and C.
So there are a couple of properties in area A.
Yeah, Jake just confirmed there are a couple of properties in area A. So thank you very much, Director Reeve, Director Monroe. And vote. Thanks, Council.
Okay, so this is the proposed operating financial plan for the local water service areas for B and it's voted B and C. All in favor? And that's unanimous.
We have a majority.
Recommendation 3. Moved by Grant, seconded by Moran. And this is the proposed operating financial plan and capital plan for Union Bay Water Local Service Area, and that it be approved. It's a vote of the full board. Oh, alternate Director Monroe.
As former chair of the Union Bay Improvement District, I've just initiated some discussions with staff on this topic, and I just wanted to state it publicly here that.
Can you speak a little bit more into the mic?
Sorry, the microphone's not down. Aha. That I don't consider Union Bay Water just any other service quite yet, and that it's just recently undergone conversion from Union Bay Improvement District into the board. And the request of staff is that the conversion study indicated that conversion would be cost neutral. And while rates are rising by, parcel taxes are rising by 30%, rates are rising by 20%, that doesn't mean they're not cost neutral. It means that the costs may have gone up anyways under a UBID consideration. And the conversion study further said that CVRD may apply different maintenance and operational standards, which would cause cost increases, which might make it not neutral, but also may provide greater benefit. And so the need here is for clarity for the residents of Union Bay, the ratepayers of Union Bay, that this in fact is cost neutral, or that it is in line with the wording and the findings of the conversion study. So I don't think I need to change any resolutions or anything here, just to make the discussion clear that that is a requirement of this, that we get that information out to the residents of Union Bay.
Madam Chair, we'll make a best effort to communicate that. Our commitment is to provide a mail out or pardon me, an insert into the water bills to explain these changes. And we'll definitely take into consideration the past and how the residents will be considering the matter and thinking about that. We'll also have to inform them of some of the findings of the water master plan that have identified some of the needs for the system moving forward as well. But we'll be sure to reflect on their understanding based on the conversion and the new information that is driving some of these cost factors.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, we're on recommendation 3. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Recommendation 4 moved by Grieve, seconded by Grant. Again, it's to approve the operating and capital plan for Royston Water Local Service Area. Any further discussion? Okay, it's vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Recommendation 5 moved by Grieve, seconded by Grant. And it is the expenditure reserve establishment bylaws for all the communities, street lighting specific areas under the areas. And we have a question from alternate Director Monroe.
A quick question, is this intended to be a listing of all street lighting services or just specific ones that require reserves?
And I'll ask Kevin Val to answer that question.
Thank you, through the chair to the director. So yeah, when we did present these reports to the Electoral Area Services Committee, we did note that we have roughly a dozen street lighting services throughout the Comox Valley. Of those, approximately 5 do have some form of reserve at this point. So just given some of the increasing demands with the services, we just want to ensure that all of these services start building some type of reserve to deal with any issues that may arise going forward.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, I don't see any further lights. We're on recommendation 5. It's a vote of the areas. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to 9, moved by Grieve, seconded by Grant. It's the Regional Parks and Trails Committee minutes from February 28th. And it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to bylaws and resolutions. Director Grieve has moved bylaw 755 for first and second, seconded by Grant. It's a vote of the areas, Courtney Comox. And all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Third reading moved by Grieve, seconded by Grant. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to bylaw 756. Moved by Moran, seconded by Grant. It's the Union Bay Water Tolls and Charges bylaw for first and second reading. A vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Third reading moved by Grant, seconded by McCollum. Vote of full board. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to bylaw 757, the Royston Water Service Regulation. First and second moved by Grant, seconded by Moran. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. McCollum moved third, seconded by Grant. Again, the full board. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. We're on to recommendation or bylaw 758, the Comox Valley Water Local Services Area Parcel Tax bylaw. First and second moved by Grant, seconded by Hillian, and it's a vote of the areas only. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Third reading moved by Grant, seconded by Grieve. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. We have already done bylaw 759 at the beginning, so we're on to bylaws for adoption. We have bylaw 752, water tolls bylaw. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Grant. And it's a vote of full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Bylaw 753 is the Denman Island Water Regulation and Rates bylaw, moved by Grieve, seconded by Moran for adoption. And alternate director Monroe, go ahead.
Just a quick question, nothing to do with Graham Lake as a part of this?
Does the question is, does this Denman Island Water Regulation involve Graham Lake?
Are you able to answer, Kevin? Thank you.
Through the chair to the director. So for this particular regularization, no, it does bring in line the Denman Island Water Local Service Area in line or in step with the rates that are being charged by Graham Lake.
And that would be currently charged by Graham Lake?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, we're on bylaw 753 and it's a vote of the full board for adoption. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to new business. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Moran. This is the Island Corridor Foundation update from Director Arbor. And I do see he's there online to speak to it. So we'll pass it over to him. Oh, Director Hillian, sorry. Do you have a question before Director Arbor begins?
Well, on a point of order, Chair, just to confirm, can Director Arbor take part in the meeting along with the alternate Director Monroe at the same time?
We'll go to Jake. Is he able to speak to the report?
Jake Martins will speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so the electoral areas only have one director, so there's only one able to participate in the meeting at a time. So alternate Director Monroe will be stepping aside while Director Arbor attends.
Thank you.
Just for
Alternate Director.
for the ICF Foundation, Director Arbor will take over. When we come back to the other new business item that we discussed earlier that I have a motion for, I will step back in.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Now that we've got that sorted, go ahead, Director Arbor.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So funny enough, I'm right now, so it's quite appropriate. We should have the ICF report. So you saw my update, and obviously it's a critical time for the Island Corridor as the province and federal government are considering the next steps, both in regards to whether they consider it in the public interest, and second, if they're going to put investment. And I promised this update a couple of weeks back following the letter that we wrote. But since then, I think some of you have noticed there's been some activity and challenges and opportunities at the ICF. And so I thought I would welcome any questions or comments on the report. And I laid out a couple of options for us in regards to maintaining the status quo for to the end of the month to see what happens with the province and federal government. Or if we wanted to write a letter really encouraging them to put their minds to it in short term and make some recommendations or announcements or otherwise engage properly in the topic so that we have a sense of where we're heading. So I'll open it to questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Director Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure what the point of writing a letter would be since we just recently signed on to a letter that essentially was encouraging that the process be moved forward. But I'm wondering if Director Arbor can maybe give us his best guess on whether there's anything coming from the feds in the province, or if this is in fact the death knell of the railway.
Thanks, Director Hillian. It's by no means a death knell unless I think the province and federal government really decide to go that route. I think as communities and we're advocating, and there's been, even since I wrote this update last week, I know there's been some discussions between the various parties on the go forward, and I'm trying to maintain those key relationships as well. So it's evolving quickly. When I wrote that, it was a bit difficult because we had a bit of a mass resignation from the First Nation communities on the board due to their frustration that were listed in the update. But I think you're right. If you choose option one, the status quo, I think it's fine. But I felt that with that update, hopefully directors have all the information you feel is needed while this month goes by, so to speak.
Thank you. And Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the report, Director Arbor. Yeah, I guess a couple of comments. They're not all in line with each other, but one thing that maybe popped out at me in the report was that part of the reason stated for the resignation was a frustration with the engagement report, that it did not reflect or accurately reflect the engagement, which I read the report before this meeting happened, and I couldn't find anything in it that showed really much support at all for rail, or that was my interpretation, that it was pretty clear that there was little support for rail. So hearing that, I guess maybe there was further negativity toward the rail option not expressed in it goes to show that there's probably some very strong opinions about the rail option, just given those two things. So I guess I just wanted to make that comment, and I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, but
Yeah,
that's
I
how-
could. And
Go
thanks
ahead.
for that. Thanks for that comment, Dr. McCollum. And it's true that the meeting was fairly long at the ICF last week, and it's partly that the report, if you're referring to the First Nations engagement report in particular, it didn't really break down. The province didn't release the individual letters from all the First Nations or anything like that, and it was left a bit in the air as to which one had said they may be interested in operating a railway versus those that say we are done with this. And so we had some discussions around that. And I think where we left it is we don't have that knowledge, but for the First Nations that were present at the meeting, they were, there was a really strong view for some of them that this was nearing the end of the line. But for others, including Charlene Everson, who's obviously our Comox First Nation rep and vice chair of ICF, she did mention, a bit like Dr. Helian just said, the process is underway, so let's see it through, and let's see what comes up between the province and the First Nations. In regards to the regional district, I would say that the engagement, we also expressed as directors that it was limited engagement, and for regional district, I understand that the level of participation was mostly with staff of all the regional districts, so there was no political engagement in that report. So we're kind of sending that feedback, and I think our CEO and others continue conversations with the province. And but you're right that this is definitely the month where I think the key discussions need to happen and key decisions, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess the other thing is, in my mind, there really only is one option. This is basically in the hands of higher levels of government, and I don't think there's really much else for the regional districts to do, and that it needs to be resolved between the First Nations if it's going to go forward, and that's just basically beyond our purview, I think at this point. But I guess the other thing I wanted to raise, and this is obviously not something that we need to address at today's meeting, and the deadline for the province is just around the corner, but we do have $392,000 tied up in a reserve, or however that's being held, for reinitiating this. And I can't see a path forward in which we're ever going to be asked to provide those funds. Either the province is going to take this on and lead a massive infrastructure project, or it's not. But I just don't really see a path where regional districts are going to hand over a few $100,000 each to make something happen here. So I think we should maybe revisit this in the near future. Basically for housekeeping at this point, I would say.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, it's hard. Sorry, it's hard for me to see the flow of the meeting, but if I may comment on that, I think, unless Jake or Russell, probably Russell can correct me, but I think the last time we talked about that, maybe in September meeting, we said that we would make a decision, bring a recommendation on that one at our April board meeting. That's my recollection. Maybe Russell can comment on that. And I think our board at the time said, well, yeah, let's wait till after the March deadline, so to speak.
Madam Chair, yes, the director is correct.
I'm just wondering if there is no investment and ICF is somehow dissolved, there is still the remediation costs. I'm not sure if that's been discussed there, what each regional district's role would be in contributing to remediation of the line.
Thank you. That's a bit to be determined. My understanding is there is a process for abandonment of railways if we got to that point, or even if there was alternate usage. That's something that's been hotly debated at the ICF, who would be responsible for that remediation. I don't have answers for you today on that. I think that's also part of the conversations that might be happening. And I know the Minister of Transportation is quite aware of that need. Should the other option be to not invest in rail, that this is not disappearing as an issue and topic for the province and federal government, that they would likely need to pick up a lot of that piece.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further lights, so thank you for the report, Director. And we are We're on, we're on receipt. So vote of the full board. We'll have Director Arbor vote on that before we invite alternate director back. Okay, thank you. It's carried. And yep, so we'll say goodbye to Director Arbor so that we can invite alternate Director Monroe back.
Thank you. Just for my clarity, Chair. So basically, is the status quo option that was discussed since there's no further action?
Yes, I believe that was there's nobody putting forward a further motion, so it would default to the status quo.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so under new business, alternate Director Monroe.
So we're back to discussing what was discussed in camera with respect to deep water recovery, and that staff should a resolution that staff be directed to provide a report regarding options for lobbying relevant federal and provincial ministers on enforcement of environmental regulations associated with the current non-permitted uses on the property at 5084 Island Highway South.
Okay, it's been seconded. Staff, I thought the direction was that you were to bring back a report regarding the.
Yeah, Jake provided the resolution, right? Yeah, just bring a report back. Yeah. And the board should just do a 2/3 majority confirmation to consider the matter first and then vote on the resolution.
Okay, so we'll take a step back and vote for the addendum. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Grieve. All in favor? Any opposed to hearing the addendum? That's carried. And Director Hardy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the process, just trying to understand. So is this new business, do we go in camera or will we take it out of camera?
Nope, this is a public matter for the board to consider. The director has brought forward the suggestion that the board lobby federal and provincial ministers with respect to the deep water recovery site at 5084 Island Highway for the purposes of them acting on the regulations that apply to them. If you adopt this proposed resolution, then staff would bring back for your consideration at the next meeting what that ask or lobbying effort would be.
Thank you. Director Grant.
So as far as public comment is concerned, we can't talk about the in-camera. We can talk about this clearly, but what's our limitation here? I just don't want anybody to go out there and get themselves in trouble on this.
So yeah, the board is aware that circumstances are happening at this particular property, and the regional district is taking legal action with respect to its land use bylaws. But if the director is concerned that you, the board, should be asking the province to take more action with respect to the regulations, that's fair consideration to be made in an open meeting.
And Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. And the motion doesn't explicitly state it, but I'm hoping it's implied that we would be working with Comox First Nation in this regard. And I'm also hoping that staff will get some consideration to informing the public of what else may be transpiring in relation to this this situation in an appropriate time, so that the public is aware of just how seriously the regional district takes this, and what sort of process is underway and the constraints therein. Thanks.
Madam Chair, if it's the board's desire to refer this to Comox First Nations, by all means, you could add that to the resolution that staff can confirm the position of Comox First Nation on this matter and seek their support.
So as an amendment, moved by Hillian and seconded by Morin, that it be referred to Comox First Nation and seeking their support. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, voting on the amendment to include Comox First Nation referral. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. So back to the motion as amended. Any further discussion? So the full board, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Termination moved by Greaves, seconded by Grants. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.